Hi everyone, welcome to part 3. The fourth special case is fairly simple, but Nimzowitsch felt it was necessary in order to understand the complicated nature of the fifth case. It consists of driving the king out of the corner, after which some marauding takes place. Nimzowitsch's word for attacking, winning material, or having something decisive to do. So rook h7 check, king g8, rook a g7 check, king f8, and now rook f7 check, and white is winning the bishop and then the game easily. And a necessary condition for this to work was that the rook on h7 was protected. Otherwise, after king g8, rook takes f1, it would be hanging if the pawn wasn't here. The important thing to note in this special case is that the united rooks on the 7th rank are able to drive the opposing king out of the corner and onto the third file. This factor is what makes the basis for the fifth special case. With that in mind, you should be able to solve this one pretty easily. White wants to occupy the 8th rank with one of his rooks in order to deliver mate, but the queen has that covered. However, using the maneuver we just looked at, white can do some decisive marauding. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Rook h7 check is of course the move. King g8, rook a g7 check, king f8. Now rook h8 check, king g7, and rook takes b8 with an easy win. The position with the two rooks on h7 and g7, this one here, constitutes the typical starting position for flanking maneuvers from the 7th to the 8th rank. Of course, if the g7 rook was defended on this square, then black would be faced with mate. After the king moves, rook h8 will be mate. And here he only avoids that because his king is attacking the rook on g7. Nimzowitsch stresses that any king that is being flanked in this manner should always strive to maintain contact with the closer of the two rooks. The side that is performing the flanking maneuver will try and interrupt this contact if there's nothing better to do, and if the king tries to flee into the corner, the rooks will simply give checks to force it out into the open and then try and continue with the flanking maneuver. There are three main aims with this in mind. Firstly, the immediate win of material, which we saw in this case. White wins the queen for a rook. Secondly, he can aim to break the contact between the king and the nearer of the two rooks. For example, like this. We have the rooks ready here to outflank the king, although white has to be careful because he's faced with mate on the next move on g2. However, the bishop comes to the rescue with bishop b4 check, and this has the effect of breaking the contact between the king and the rook on g7, and it forces the king to e8, after which comes rook h8 and mate. Here's the same position, but with the bishop removed and a pawn on e6. It's still winning for white, and if you want to try and find the winning plan, stop the video now. e7 check is the only winning move and the only way to break the contact between the king and the rook here on g7. King e8 is forced, and now comes the flanking rook h8 check, again forcing king d7, and now white can queen the pawn with check from the g7 rook, as well as a new queen on e8, and mate follows quickly. This one is a little tougher. Again, if you want to try and find the winning line, please stop the video now. Rook g7 check is the first move, as to begin with, white must first create the rooks ready to outflank the king, set up as we saw in the last few examples. Playing instead knight f2, aiming for knight g4, and so on, leads only to a draw at best after bishop e2. It's on knight g4 now. So rook g7 is correct, and after king f8, the correct way to continue is with the rook h7, threatening mate with the rook h8. And king g8 is the best way to deal with it. Playing instead d4, intending bishop g8, will lose tactically in a similar manner to this line. So after king g8, rook c, g7 check forces king f8, and we have achieved the rooks ready to outflank the king. The only remaining piece of the puzzle is to break the contact between the king and the g7 rook somehow, and this can be done immediately with knight g5, threatening knight e6 check and mate on the next move with a rook on the 8th rank. Nimzowitsch gave d4 as best, and black can also play rook a6, intending to sack the exchange in the event of knight e6 check, after which he is still lost, of course, but it takes white longer to win. And playing instead f takes g5 allows f6, protecting the g7 rook and forcing mate in 2. After d4, rook h8 check, only move is bishop g8, and now rook h takes g8 and it's mate. So d4 is best, and now knight e6 check, bishop takes e6, f takes e6, and now we have the same position as we saw before, the pawn on e6 and the rooks doubled on the 7th rank. There are slight differences in the black pieces, so it doesn't matter because white will win easily and in a similar manner to what we saw before, with e7 check followed up with rook h8 check and queening with a check from the rook here on g7 and winning the game. Black can give up a rook with rook e8 to prevent this, and after e7 check he can play rook takes e7, rook takes e7, but he is still lost by a mile, especially as the rooks can attack these pawns from behind, which, as we saw before, is the most decisive approach. Oh, hold on a second. Okay. So here is a case of the third and final example for this section and this chapter. A tempo winning combination is the third thing that white can try and do, or either side can try and do, with the rooks doubled on the 7th like this. White is the exchange up, but an incredible 5 pawns down, and at first glance his position seems lost. But due to his having 2 rooks on the 7th, he has incredible resources. If you want to try and figure them out, then stop the video now. Rook h7 check is of course the first move, forces king g8. Now comes rook fg7 check, again forcing king f8. And what can white do now? There's no way to break the contact between the king and the rook on g7. So rook h8 ideas, to force mate, are not an option. And more to the point, black is 1 move away from queening the a2 pawn, and it seems that white may have to content himself with perpetual check, but not if we look deeper. Rook takes d7 prevents black from queening because he is threatened with mate on h8 if he was to queen now, and so he's forced to play king g8 if he wants to prevent the mate, after which white can repeat the maneuver, rook dg7 check, king f8, now rook takes c7, and it goes on. Black has to defend the mate. He's got no time to queen the pawn. Instead he must play forced defensive moves whilst white continues to attack, gaining not only material but also tempi along the way. So rook cg7 check, king f8, rook takes b7. king g8, and rook bg7 check. Playing instead rook takes a7 secures only a draw. White must threaten mate again before taking, because here black can play a1 and queen, and he's not getting mated on h8 because the king is on g8, and now white would have to take the perpetual, would ruin what could be a beautiful game. So after king g8 he plays rook bg7 check, and after king f8 only plays rook takes a7, and now he is of course winning. And Nimzowitsch likens this sequence to the legend of Svatogor, a Russian hero who had to battle a dragon and defeated him by deliberately falling to the earth at crucial moments and getting back in touch with Mother Nature, just as white did here, returning to the position with his rooks on h7 and g7. In this position black still must deal with the mate threat, which means he's forced into both trading a pair of rooks and losing the a2 pawn. No matter how he plays, a pair of rooks are going to come off, and this pawn will drop, so he'll just be completely lost. So this is the third example in the fifth special case. White returns to the starting position of the rooks on the top two ranks repeatedly, and the mate threat means he can win material and tempi. And it's important to note that it could of course happen on the other side of the board, with the king on say a8 and b8 and the two rooks on the top of the queen side. You know, obviously it makes no difference. And Nimzowitsch finishes this section by stressing that the position with the two rooks on the 7th rank and two outer files is akin to the start of the romantic novel when the boy and girl first meet. All subsequent romance stems from there. So when you find yourself with such a position, ask yourself which of the three modes of attack you wish to pursue. Okay, that's it for this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.